episode 111 of the Habs Culture Podcast. My name is Justin Schwartz, alongside Liam Baum. It's been a really long time since Liam and I have gone on the mic and been able to talk about Habs hockey, but we are happy to be back, as we say every time. Obviously, naturally, things kind of get in the way with school and work and, life in general. But whenever we have the time and whenever we're able to make the time, it's really nice to come on here and be able to talk about one of the things that we love most. Liam, the Canadiens have had a very, very, very strong start, or very strong first half of this 2025-26 season. They currently sit at third in the Atlantic Division with a record of 27, 15, and 7 with 61 points and only 3 points back of both the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Detroit Red Wings for first and second place in the Atlantic Division. Now, it has been a long time since we spoke. We're not going to go all the way back in time to talk about what's happened so far this season, but I'm going to throw it on to you right away, Liam. Through 49 games played, with 33 games left, how are you feeling about the Canadiens so far this season, and how do you feel about their future for those last 33 games?
Yeah, I mean, what a great start to the season. If we're looking back to last year, this is like an insane jump. Thinking back to last year, a lot of people probably thought the Habs weren't even touching the playoffs. They end up making that final push, getting in the last wildcard spot. And this season was like a major jump, being a top 3 team in the Atlantic Division right now, pushing for first. They've held the top spot in the Atlantic for over 25 days before being bumped down a few spots here. But yeah, overall, the players you want to see produce are producing, whether that's Demidov in his rookie year, whether that's Slaf taking a huge jump, being almost point per game, whether it's Lane Hutson in his sophomore year being over point per game, and then obviously the likes of Suzuki and Caulfield again taking steps forward, which they've done their entire careers in Montreal. So as a Habs fan, obviously an exciting time. You want to see them make a big playoff push. You want to see them make a big playoff run. Maybe this is the year, but I mean, if this isn't the year, it's coming very soon. So again, as a Habs fan, very exciting times. I don't know about you, but going into every single Habs game, I expect them to at least make it close or win. There shouldn't be any team in the NHL that should dominate the Canadiens. And I think we saw that at the start of the year. It was a bit of a roller coaster, but they're back at this current pace where they're winning at least like 60% of their games or taking it to overtime because they've been there so many times this season. But yeah, it's been a great start, and hopefully they can keep this pace up and ride it all the way to the playoffs.
And a fun fact on that, Liam, a lot of their success, like you mentioned, has been about guys that are taking steps or just continuing on these very, very strong paces to start the season. And just for context purposes, for the listeners at home, Nick Suzuki, 15 goals, 39 assists, and 54 points in 49 games. So he's over a point per game pace. Lane Hutson, second on the team in points. Who would have thought? Because the last time that we spoke, Liam, if I'm not mistaken, there was, I don't know if it was the last time or maybe 2 or 3 times ago. But the one thing that we were mentioning is that before Lane Hutson got his contract extension with the Canadiens, there was a little bit of a rough patch for Lane Hutson. There were high expectations, and he wasn't meeting those at the time. Well, now fast forward to, January 19th today. Lane Hutson has 8 goals, 42 assists, and 50 points in 49 games. So he's just over PPG as a defenseman. Cole Caulfield, 24 goals, 24 assists, and 48 points in 49 games. Ivan Demidov, 11 goals, 30 assists, 41 points in 49 games. And Uri Slafkovsky, 19 goals, 21 assists, and 40 points in 49 games. Now, I was going to mention this before, but the Canadiens are the only team, if I'm not mistaken, with 5 players with 40 or more points in the 2025-2026 season. Now, who would have thought? Definitely not me, but super excited and super happy with this trajectory.
If there's one player that has shown you or impressed you the most this season, who would it be?
By far, bar none, it's Uri Slafkovsky. And the reason for that, it's not to take away anything from the other guys on this team, but I don't know if you remember, I was getting to that point with Slaf where I was becoming more and more pessimistic. I didn't see a path towards a consistent enough style of game for Elias Slafkovsky to be a potential 75-point plus player in this league. And now, and I think we'll talk about this when we go over lines, but I think the fact that he was actually put on a line with Demidov and Kapanen, where I think that he controls more the pace of the game and he's the puck carrier and he's the one that dominates the neutral zone, he's become a different beast altogether. And I think that that's where this consistency, and hopefully it keeps up, has really surprised me and impressed me so far.
And what do you think Slaf's ceiling is?
It's a great question.
In terms of points, in terms of goal production, just as a player overall, what do you think his ceiling is now that he's controlling that second line, which can very well be a first line in the very near future?
Look, he's already at 19 goals through 49 games, and he's second on the team in goals. I think he's fine. He's found kind of that spot on the power play too in the bumper where he's actually started to pick up more and more goals from that spot and learn how to play that, which is not an easy thing to do in the NHL. And if you're good at it, you'll benefit. But to answer your question, I feel like the ceiling, I think the ceiling is still so high, right? He's only 21 or 22 years old now. I'm pretty sure he's 21. I'd like to say that the ceiling is probably at around 35 goals for Slaf. I don't know if that's a crazy take, but again, we're at 19 right now, halfway through the season. And I want to say that the ceiling is probably 90 plus points for him. And again, when we talk about ceiling, we're talking about the highest that they'll ever get to. And I truly do believe that a big reason for that number maybe being lower than some people's expectations is due to the fact that he'll never be the go-to guy on this team. Right? Like, I don't think he'll be the guy that's playing 22 to 24 minutes a game in crunch time. But I do think that he'll be that solid, very, very solid second line winger, first power play guy for years to come with a unit that clearly seems to have gained a lot of confidence and a lot of chemistry playing together at such a young age. So I don't know what you think about that. 35 goals, 90 plus points. I don't know if you think his ceiling could be higher.
I think his ceiling can be higher. He is a first overall pick, and he's finally playing like a first overall player. I think the ceiling for him is over 35 goals, over 50 assists, potentially a 100-point player. And if we're comparing that to the ceilings of Suzuki and Caulfield, I think Demidov and Slaf are going to elapse that ceiling, whether that's in the next few years, whether that's maybe even next year. I think their potential is way higher than Suzuki and Caulfield. Not to say that Suzuki and Caulfield haven't played like superstars. Suzuki's basically a 90-plus point player, but is that ceiling ever going to be higher? Can he ever reach over 100 points? Is Caulfield ever going to be able to reach that 50-goal quota? So I think Slaf and Demi have that 100-point plus potential. And I think that's why, in my mind, they are going to be the Canadiens' first line in the next, 3-4 years when Suzuki and Caulfield are taking more of that best second line responsibility in the NHL. That, they have the potential to be the best second line ever.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think the reason that I gave the marks that I gave was purely based off the fact that they will be second line for the foreseeable future. And I do think that it might end up coming close and being more of a 1A, 1B situation where the Canadiens and Martin St. Louis are relying on both lines equally to produce and not just looking to Suzuki, Caulfield, and whoever will be that third guy in the future. Right now, placeholder would be Alex Texier / Kirby Dach potentially when he comes back. But that's a conversation that we'll have in a few minutes. But I mean, you cannot deny the pure chemistry that comes out of the Slafkovsky, Kapanen, and Demidov line. And what's impressed me the most, and obviously they only play at 5-on-5 together, but it's the amount that they dominate at 5-on-5. And I really do believe that their games complement each other really, really nicely. And if we go back again, I'm referencing the conversations that we had a couple months ago now, but I really did believe that Uri Slafkovsky cannot and couldn't sustain his own line. I thought that, and I had this conversation with multiple people, that if Uri Slafkovsky got bumped down to the second line or started playing, around 15 to 16 minutes a game, he would be a 40-point player. And I'm happy that I'm wrong. I'm very happy that I'm wrong. Now, let's hope that for the remaining 33 games of the season, this pace / play continues and he finally realized that he's 6'4", 200 and almost 40 pounds, and he can carry the puck without necessarily getting knocked off of it. I really hope that that can continue. And that's why, to me, he's been the most impressive player this season for the Canadiens.
Yeah, and adding a player like Demidov is just like an insane ad for the Habs. Can't forget the guy's 20 years old. He's almost a point per game in his rookie season. Like the ceiling for him, I think it's 120 points plus. It's really hard to come into the league as a rookie and put numbers up like this. He had first overall skill. He has that potential. He obviously slipped for all the wrong reasons because he was in the KHL, because potentially wasn't, coming over to the NHL as soon as teams wanted him to be. But yeah, he obviously complements Slaf very well. And whoever that center is on that line is going to produce no matter what. And I think there's a lot of storylines this season. I know this is kind of like a halfway mark show. But Noah Dobson, we haven't really talked about him at all. There was minimal conversation in the past episodes about Dobson, but coming in as the most or the highest paid player on the Canadiens roster, he's been one of the Canadiens' best players. Not a power play one defenseman this season, so obviously his offensive production was going to take a hit, but he's on a 55-point pace. When he's on the ice, everything seems to calm down. He's such a smart player in the defensive zone and can still produce offensively 5-on-5. Plays big minutes for the Habs. He's been such an important piece for the Habs' success this season. So I'm excited to see what his production looks like. Obviously, Oliver Kapanen having an outstanding season when a lot of people wrote him off after last season when he came in as, a 21-year-old rookie. Leading rookies in goals this season. Demidov and Slaf play a big part in that. But the ability to finish has been outstanding for Kapanen. And then a guy like Texier, who's showing up at the right time for the Canadiens. Obviously, a bit of a placeholder right now with the depleted lineup when Dach, Newhook, Laine, and Gouli went out. So he came in to help a lot. And even a story like Laine, who we don't really know what the future holds for him, but we'll get into all those line combos. Just a lot of things going on this season. A lot of things moving in the right direction for the Canadiens. But nonetheless, like even Phil Danault, bringing him back has been a great piece for the Habs. Good face-off guy. I know there's been a lot of hate on him recently for his play, but he's going to be a guy in the playoffs that the Canadiens need to play big minutes, or he needs to play big minutes for the Canadiens in order for them to succeed. You can't be the youngest team in the NHL going into the playoffs and expect to run through teams. You need guys like Danault who bring poise, who have played on the Canadiens in the past, went to the finals, and had a lot of success with the team. So he's been a really good 3C, I think, and will be for the next couple of years.
I think you pointed out something that's very, very important, and it kind of ties to the way that Josh Anderson plays the game. Those are guys that when you need them the most, they will show up in different ways. It's not going to be necessarily on the score sheet, but it might be Anderson through his physicality, and it's going to be Danault through his defensive play. And when the Canadiens, let's just say for the time being, we can potentially assume that the Canadiens are, at least at this given moment, in a playoff spot. And if the Canadiens do make the playoffs and somehow match up against a team like Tampa, again, this is all hypothetical, but for the sake of this conversation, match up against Tampa, the conversations will be Philip Danault's line against whenever Kucherov's on the ice, whenever Braden Point's on the ice, whenever Jake Gensel's on the ice. And it's going to be a question of, and then I guarantee you there's going to be a stat or there's going to be a Twitter post saying, these are the stats of these players when Phil Danault's on the ice. And it's just a question of him showing up when it matters. You saw him do it against McDavid 2 years in a row against Edmonton in the first round of the playoffs. And I don't doubt that it will be the same case when the Canadiens make the playoffs and hopefully make the playoffs this season, alongside a guy like Josh Anderson, who, again, we've obviously been very critical of him in the past when it comes to regular season play. He hasn't been that points guy or that goals guy that the Canadiens expected when they signed him to that extension. But again, Liam, let's not forget that when we were watching that playoff series together, he was by far and away the Canadiens' best player in that series against Washington.
Yeah, unreal. Moving on to, we touched base on a little bit in the standings, but the Atlantic Division, best division in the NHL, no question about that. Tampa Bay, what a season for them so far. John Cooper really pushing for that Coach of the Year when, it's hard for him to win it because he's had so much success, but they won 13 games in a row, followed by the Red Wings, who are right there with them. Kind of a surprise season for them. I think we both kind of wrote them out just based on the minimal changes they made in the offseason, but they're finding success this year. Obviously, the Habs sitting right there as well. But then we move down the list a little bit. Boston, who would have thought they'd be in a wild card spot? Buffalo, who would have thought they'd be in a wild card spot? And just sitting outside, Toronto, Florida, back-to-back Stanley Cup champs, and Ottawa, playoff team last year, obviously have dealt with a lot of problems. But if we're going into the division, one thing that I found on Twitter the other day really surprised me. The Toronto Maple Leafs, who sit outside a playoff spot with 56 points, are 13th in the NHL and not in a playoff spot. And I can only see this continuing until the end of the season. So there's going to be a team probably in the 12 to 14 spot range that won't make the playoffs because they're in that stacked Atlantic division. It's just going to suck whoever's in that spot. And that's why it's so important that the Canadiens stay hot. You have to win games. I think I saw a stat in the last month. Every single team in the Atlantic division, or the top 6 teams in the league, the best records are from the Atlantic division. So it just shows how competitive that division is. Going back to it, there's only 2 teams that have negative differentials. And that's the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions who are getting Kachuk back tonight, actually. And then the Ottawa Senators. So this is a very tough division, and the Canadiens are holding very strong. They just need to stay consistent. I mean, look at all these last 10 game records. It's insane. Bruins have won 6 in a row. Like, how is this happening?
I mean, we wrote off the Bruins when we did our tier list going into the season. I think we had them as a bottom 5 team entering the season, considering their play last year, and now considering the fact that they did nothing in the offseason. And then here we are, another well-oiled machine in this Atlantic division. And I think that's the theme. I think Tampa Bay, as long as John Cooper is behind the bench, and obviously they have their base, but John Cooper can literally transform anyone in that middle to bottom 6 into a guy that can be very powerful for that team. And the truth is, Liam, and we'll talk about this trade, not necessarily in depth, but the Kiefer Sherwood trade that happened just a few hours ago, sending Kiefer Sherwood to the San Jose Sharks. I'm just very happy that he didn't end up on the Tampa Bay Lightning, because I thought that there was a potential chance that that was the exact team that would go after Kiefer Sherwood and plug him right into the third line, and all of a sudden he's a game wrecker. So I'm honestly happy that if he's not going to go to the Habs, he's going to go to a team that isn't in this division. But like you said, look at those last 10 games, right? 9-0-1 for Tampa, 7-2-1 for Detroit, 6-3-1 for Montreal, 8-1-1 for Boston, 7-2-1 for Buffalo, 7-1-2 for Toronto, 5-4-1 for Florida, and 4-4-2 for the Senators. Not a single one of those records is below 500. That's insane, and that makes it fun. But now I'm going to throw this question onto you. Does that speak a little bit to how poor and how bad the Metro is?
I mean, let's take a look right now. Carolina obviously have been a very good team, but I'm looking down from 2 to 8. I don't see a single one of those teams beating an Atlantic team in a first-round playoff matchup, which is why the NHL needs to go back to the 1-8 playoff structure, because obviously 2 of these teams are going to move on, or one of these teams at least. So, I mean, just look at the point production, look at the records. It's just nowhere near what the Atlantic has. I mean, you're looking at the third-place team, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They were bottom 5 last year? I don't know if they're bottom 5, but like bottom 10. Like this isn't gonna like lead to playoff success. Like none of these teams are beating, the Red Wings likely. They're not beating the Habs. They're not beating the Bruins. I mean, right now with the way the Sabres are playing, you can't tell me they're going to beat the Sabres. And then the Leafs and Panthers, who are, teams that have had great success in the regular season, and the Panthers especially in the playoffs. So 100%, it does speak to the skill level and the success that the Metro will have in the playoffs come playoff time.
And just for context, the Boston Bruins would be sitting at second in the Metro right now as the first wild card team right now. So, I mean, again, it does speak to it. I think that, like you mentioned, the format may have to change because this Metro division has seemingly gotten weaker year after year, with the top end production that they've usually gotten out of the Hurricanes. And don't get me wrong, the Capitals are still a relatively strong team, but they had a drastic drop off after their phenomenal season last year where they finished first in the league. So I think that it does beg the question of, are we going to, or is the NHL going to have to change something? But for the time being, like you mentioned maybe a few minutes ago, someone is going to get snubbed in this Atlantic division, whether you like it or not. And I'm just hoping that it's not the Montreal Canadiens, and I'm hoping it's the Toronto Maple Leafs, because like you mentioned, right now the Leafs sit outside that wild card with 56 points, where they'd be third in the Metro. So look, I mean, it's going to be interesting. It's going to come down to the wire. Out of these teams, Liam, and let's just focus on the Atlantic for now, which team surprises you the most, whether it's in a positive or negative way?
I mean, first I'll go from the bottom of the list. I don't think you can be super surprised about the Panthers being down there, considering the injuries they've had to deal with this season. Obviously, losing your first line center in Barkov and your best winger in Kachuk, you're not going to have as much success. But it's surprising to me that they're still a positive team and they still have a very good chance to make the playoffs. So I think that's one of the teams that I'm not super surprised about their record. But I mean, looking at the Red Wings, I actually can't believe that they're sitting tied at the top of the Atlantic Division. They didn't make any significant adds in the offseason. They're basically the same team. They brought in John Gibson, who's an aging goalie who hasn't had success in a long time and is playing out of his mind now. I mean, I guess their younger guys have taken a step forward. Raymond looks like a superstar in the NHL. But, you know, JVR, like, he's producing as if he was 25 again. Simon Edvinsson, obviously a high drafted defenseman, but playing out of his mind. Like, I just don't see how this is correlating to, you know, a top team in the Atlantic. And I don't want to say it's a fluke, but again, I don't see how this team has the right pieces to be successful in the playoffs.
No, I don't think so either. And I think your point exactly speaks to this Atlantic division in general when it comes to playoff success. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that they might throw around some of those Metro division teams, but I wouldn't say that any of these teams particularly are very strong when it comes to size and physicality, right? I mean, the Canadiens are not a big team. Detroit defensively might be considered a bit bigger, and they have a few forwards in their bottom six. But again, overall, not a big team. The Bruins like to play a feisty style of game, but they're not a big team. And I just think it's interesting because we haven't even talked about the Western Conference yet, but those are teams that may throw you around. They play a physical style of game. They play that Western hockey style of game. And I fear for some of these teams in the Atlantic because they are very skilled, but can they dominate in the physicality component when it matters? We see guys like Josh Anderson come through and play a more physical style of game. But the Canadiens were begging, Montreal Canadiens fans were begging for Arbor Xhekaj to come back into the lineup when Tom Wilson was ragdolling each and every single one of the Montreal Canadiens players last year. So is this a theme that can stay consistent throughout? And couldn't it become a problem? And again, you only have to face a Western Conference team once you get to the finals. But is maybe this lack of physicality, are these teams going to get a little bit too used to their opponents in this Atlantic division to the point where they might get ragdolled in those types of games? Who knows? But it's definitely interesting because there's a lot of skill, but not, in my opinion, enough physicality right now.
Yeah. I think no matter what, every team in the Atlantic is setting themselves up pretty well going into the playoffs, considering how strong this division is. You play the most games against your division throughout the season. So, I mean, playing against good teams is only going to make you better. It's not like, you know, let's scroll down here to a very weak Central Division where it's very top heavy. But I mean, Utah, Nashville, St. Louis, Chicago, Winnipeg, all very unsuccessful. I'm not going to say Utah's unsuccessful, but, you know, maybe not having the type of season that they were expected to have. And even looking into the Pacific Division, Vegas, Edmonton, I mean, this is a very weak division. Seattle should not be where they're sitting right now. They wouldn't even be, I mean, it's crazy. They'd be at the bottom of the Atlantic with 51 points. So
that's ridiculous. I honestly didn't even catch that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, and even looking at San Jose today, deciding to I mean, you can probably say San Jose is now deciding to push for a playoff spot, right? After making a Kiefer Sherwood trade.
Yeah, I would think so. I also think that it's one of those moves that it works out no matter what happens to the Sharks, right? Because he'll probably sign some sort of extension and he'll be a locker room guy that throws the body. He's physical, and you can't go wrong with that type of player in your middle six, right? He's learned how to score goals on a very bad Vancouver team, who, by the way, has 37 points in 48 games. What a drastic drop off for that franchise. But yeah, I agree. I would say that San Jose is probably looking to make the playoffs and stay competitive because you are in that position with a young core. You're not going to ruin your future by trading a bunch of young guys for guys at the deadline, but you'll make those moves that keep you competitive, like the Sherwood one. And I think that was the right move.
Yeah, and arguably, if you're the San Jose Sharks with 51 points sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic, you're maybe not going all in. You're maybe not making that trade. So it really makes you think like how different the East and West are. When it used to be the opposite, I feel like the West has been way stronger in the last probably decade. I mean, even though Panthers, Tampa have had so much success, that there was a lot more stronger teams in the West than there were in the East. And I think that's, a fact. So it really makes you think what's going to happen in the playoffs in terms of the West, because you can probably lock in at this point Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota, Vegas, and Edmonton. That's 5 of 8 teams. But then the other 3, are they really deserving to make the playoffs? And like that goes back to what I was saying before. The Leafs are one of the Atlantic teams that are sitting, maybe in the top 13 of the NHL, aren't going to make the playoffs when a team like, Seattle makes it in when they have no business being in the playoffs.
It just, I think, leads to a much easier excuse me, a much easier path for these top heavy Western teams to get to the Western Conference Final, for example, which is kind of unfortunate because the teams in the Atlantic Division or because ultimately right now we're talking about 5 teams from the Atlantic Division making the playoffs out of 8 spots at this current moment. So that's going to be a dogfight till the end. And then you're going to end up in the Eastern Conference Final having been most likely been beat up and bruised. And it's going to be tough to compete once getting to the Stanley Cup. So definitely an interesting season, considering that the Metro is garbage and the Western Conference teams are top heavy, and the Atlantic Division is just the best division in hockey. Like, I mean, if you, again, I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but the Winnipeg Jets, dead last in the Central.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, were they not top 5 in the league last year? I mean,
they won the President's Trophy.
Yeah, that it was them or Washington. I forget which team, but it might have finished Winnipeg, but like that's just ridiculous to think about.
Yeah, crazy drop off. And I think leading into our next topic here, it makes me nervous for the Canadiens.
And sorry, it was the Winnipeg Jets that won the
Yeah. And again, Hellebuck won, Vezina won, every goalie trophy possible. So it really shows how much he carries the team not having a good season this year. But yeah, like I was saying, it makes me anxious to see what other Atlantic teams are going to do come the trade deadline. And I think that'll be our next topic here. What are the Canadiens going to do in order to beef up their roster if they are going to do anything? Because if I look at a team like Tampa, if I look at a team at Detroit, they have aggressive GM. Steve Yzerman is not going to hold back this season now that the Red Wings are having success. Brisebois is never going to hold back. He always makes a big move. So, if other teams in the Atlantic are going to start adding key pieces to help them in their playoff run, will that, kind of lead to the Canadiens pushing to make a desperate move? Are they going to fizzle out if they don't make a move? So, obviously you don't want Kent Hughes to sell the house and sell the future for, a shot at one player on an expiring deal. But at the same time, you have to make a move when the time is right. So let's pull up a list of the trade bait board. It's, guys who are expiring or have some term left, but are on weaker teams that are potentially asking out. So obviously right off the bat, Kiefer Sherwood going to another West team in the San Jose Sharks, a great ad for them. We saw Rasmus Anderson yesterday get moved for a few picks. I mean, Vegas just doesn't stop adding. In the last 10 years, even going all the way to 2028. So they started in 2017, going till 2028. they are going to have only one of their first round picks in Trevor Connolly. Like, how insane is that? They've made first round picks, but they just ship them off right away in order to beef up their roster. And obviously, that's a formula that seems to be working for them, as they've only missed the playoffs one time and they've won a cup. So there's names up here. Give me some names that you think would be good ads for the Canadiens, or even other teams that would potentially hurt the Canadiens if they ended up on an Atlantic team.
It's an interesting board because now already you have, according to TSN, you have the 1 and 2 spot off this list. The third being Artemi Panarin, which obviously with 51 points in 47 games, any team would realistically be interested in him. Now, I have a couple of questions before we go on to this. And sorry, maybe I cut you off on your question, but the first question is, are you comfortable with the placeholder spot of Texier / whoever else the Canadiens might put in that first line winger spot? So that's my first question to you for the rest of the season. My second question to you is, are you okay with Oliver Kapanen, with his production so far this year, being the 2C and keeping him stuck in that position for the rest of the season?
I mean, I think those are the two biggest holes right now on the Canadiens roster. And the question is, are they going to be addressed? I think there are pieces on this trade bait board that can address those issues. Do I feel comfortable having Texier on the first line going into a playoff matchup? Probably not. Do I think right now he probably deserves that spot? Sure. But I think that is a spot on the roster that needs to be addressed. I think second line center, maybe not as important. I know the center position is, something hard to come by. But I think you have to believe in what Kapanen's doing right now. Can there be roster changes? Sure. Are there names on this list that would be a great fit for that spot? Sure. But I don't think you can break up what's working right now. But I think those are both holes that can be addressed with, the list of players here.
The only thing I will say about that, and what scares me, is that Kapanen's play with 16 goals, 27 points, 49 games, we can both agree that they are not going to shake up that line, right? It doesn't make much sense considering the amount of production and the amount of success they've had at 5-on-5. So two things can be true at once in this sense, or in this case, where Kapanen may not be good enough moving forward to compete as a 2C, but he's also he's played well enough to deserve that spot currently. But can we be comfortable enough going into a very competitive playoff series with Kapanen at 2C? So whoever they might bring in on this board, whether it's a guy like Nazem Kadri, for example, at 2C, is he taking Kapanen's spot, and are you bumping Kapanen down? I don't know. And I feel like maybe the easy answer is yes, because on paper, Kadri's had more success in this league. Kapanen's success is maybe cannot keep up at this pace. But it does scare me to think that you would mess with something that's working. And I would say that it's been working for more than just a small sample size, right? We're 49 games in. This isn't a 10-game span. This is a 25-plus game span that these players have been playing together and playing well together.
I think if you're looking at the first line right wing position on the Canadiens roster, that's probably a player you'd want to acquire with term, because that spot is like indefinitely open right now. But if you're looking at the second line C, maybe Kapanen is able to make a jump like that, whether it's Michael Hage in a couple years. So maybe that's a spot where you want to fill with a guy who's a UFA in, coming this offseason. So, for the people listening on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to podcasts on, I'll list you a couple names and you can kind of, make your opinion up. So first on the list, Panarin. Second, Kadri, followed by Stamkos, Coleman, Dougie Hamilton, Alex Tuck, Elias Pettersson, former Canadian Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Robert Thomas, Mangiapane, Palat, Garland, Luke Shen, Falk, Murphy, Connor Murphy on Chicago, Michael Bunting, Boon Jenner, and Jake DeBrusk. So with all those names, I think there's a couple options that I see being good fits for the Canadiens. Any that scream to you right away?
I think right off the bat, I know you mentioned someone with term, and I think he might be one of the only, or other than Panarin and Luke Shen, at least in the 15 that I see, that that doesn't have a contract in the upcoming year is Alex Tuch. And again, that's a player on another team in the Atlantic Division who would most likely not be moving a guy to a team that they're right now in contention for a playoff spot with. But I do like that idea. I think he fits the mold of a first line guy. He's a right wing. He has 38 points in 44 games. He is a point producer. He also has 15 goals. I do like him in that spot. I just don't know what happens because with this market, he might be in for a big deal. And I don't think that that's what the Canadians are necessarily looking to do. So, but another name that you mentioned that that's a little lower on the list. I like the idea of Jake DeBrusk. I like the idea that of Vancouver being in such a poor spot that they are most likely going to move off of him. And it makes the most sense. He's struggled in Vancouver. He's even been benched, or sorry, he's been sidelined, I think, once in Vancouver. Excuse me. But 12 goals in 45 games. He does have success on the power play. I know that he is an unbelievable shot. And the truth of the matter is that for 5 years at 5.5, I think that Kent Hughes and that brass see potentially that this contract at, over $25 million over the next 5 years, like about 27, is definitely something, or a quote unquote risk that they'd be willing to acquire and take on, with the potential upside that he can bring to this roster. I don't know what you think about him.
I like Jake DeBrusk. I think that's also a guy who's not going to be commanding, a first power play role, but will be a strong 5-on-5 player that can put the puck in the back of the net. Has actually, I believe, the most power play goals in the NHL this season with 11 out of his 12 goals. So obviously a guy who can produce, a guy who really screams to me that might be just the perfect fit for the Canadians. A guy who's on an expiring deal, won't be commanding power play one time because obviously you're not changing that up, but a guy whose overall game would complement the Canadians roster very well and fill the second line center role. Boon Jenner, captain of the Columbus Blue Jackets right now. Obviously a guy who's been in the league for a while, has dealt with some injuries, but a leader, is able to produce points, plays power play, PK, and I think would be a great complementary player for Slav and Demidov, a good guiding leadership role. Expiring deal, $3.75 million, very cheap, has 22 points in 32 games. I think he'd be a great ad for the Habs and relatively cheap. If Columbus, I know they've had some success since hiring Rick Bowness, but realistically, they're not beating out an Atlantic team for that wild card position, which would mean they'd have to be top 3 in their division. But I really do like Boon Jenner for probably the price he's commanding, his contract, and the fact that he's not, going to be asking to play power play 1, but can help out in a lot of other areas on the Canadians.
I'm going to ask you a question. Would you, and again, the compensation that would go back the other way is obviously different, but would you rather Boon Jenner at cost or a guy like Nazem Kadri at cost?
I think right now Boon Jenner would be the right choice, just because there's 3 years left of Nazem Kadri's deal, $7 million. He's 35 years old. Boon Jenner is 3 years younger. Calgary's going to be asking for a lot. I mean, looking at what they just got for Rasmus Anderson, I know he's younger and plays right defenseman, but Nazem Kadri's not going to be cheap. And I think a guy like Kapanen, like Michael Hage, will eventually occupy that second line center role. And if Nazem Kadri's holding that until he's 38, I don't really see that being a beneficial move for the Canadians. If he was on an expiring deal, I'd say the Habs should be all over it. But, just with that term, the price of that contract, it takes away from potentially giving money to other players. Whereas Boon Jenner, making half that money and is on an expiring deal, I think would fill that role perfectly. And Nazem Kadri would also be asking for, a power play 1 role, commanding a lot of minutes like he does on Calgary right now. So I think Boon Jenner is that perfect balance in terms of, what his role would be and what he would, be commanding on the Canadiens. So I really, really think Boon Jenner would be a great ad.
And one more question for you. I know based off the argument that you just gave, you're looking for someone on an expiring deal, someone that can fit in there for the time being as more of a placeholder. But if the price was right, would you trade for a guy like Elias Pettersson? Would you trade for a guy like Robert Thomas? Now, obviously, these guys are just on the trade bait board and not necessarily, it doesn't mean that their teams are necessarily looking to move them. But if the price was right, and again, I understand that Pettersson or Robert Thomas would most likely be PP1 guys wherever they go. So that, is a different argument and a different conversation in and of itself. But are those two guys that you would potentially want on your team if the price was right?
My thoughts on Pettersson might be different from a lot of other people, but I think he's a good player. But there's obviously a problem with him in the locker room. Sounds like he's a bit of a diva. It sounds like he's not much of a team guy, not much of a locker room guy. Quinn Hughes made it obvious that there was problems with him. I mean, just going back to last year with the whole JT Miller situation, is that something that the Habs really want to bring into their current team and the chemistry they have? So I'm kind of out on Pettersson. I also think the price would be way too high. I think he's making too much money for how he produces. I mean, he had a couple good years, but I really do think he's like a glorified 70-point player. Look, I'm just not huge on Elias Pettersson. Robert Thomas, a little bit different. 26 years old, has a really, really good contract at 8.125 mil, signed for the next 5 years. He is obviously a guy who can play the second line center for the next 10 years for the Canadiens. So I think if you're bringing in a guy like that, you obviously need to give up a lot more. Whether that's Kapanen, whether that's Michael Hage, whether that's a guy like Brian Becker, and probably a couple first round picks. So it's not going to be cheap, but that's obviously a long-term solution. But is that really what Ken Hughes wants? I couldn't tell you. But when there's a guy like Robert Thomas kind of being dangled in front of your face, you have to pounce on that. Montreal's an East team. St. Louis is a West team. It's a location or destination that is ideal for both sides. St. Louis obviously is not on the come up right now. They got lucky last year and made the playoffs, but they're trending downwards. A lot of issues there. So, I mean, I think you got to pounce on a guy like Robert Thomas if he's available.
The jaw-dropping moments that make hockey, hockey. Experience them all with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Missouri listeners, listen up. DraftKings Sportsbook is now live in the Show Me state. New customers, this one's for you. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over, age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at nfl.com/terms.
I think now would be a good time to now look at the lines for the Canadiens and what the lines could be looking like for the Canadiens upcoming, because with this talk about going out and getting a guy to replace Alex Texier on the first line, or going out to get a second line center to replace Kapanen going forward, we also are, I don't want to say forgetting, because we're not forgetting, but we're also not talking about the fact that the Canadiens have Kirby Dach, Patrik Laine potentially coming back, and Newhook at some point or another, which obviously is probably, I don't want to say sooner rather than later, but obviously gets lost in the back of our minds because he's been out for so long. But that was a guy that the Canadiens started to depend on and was actually playing really, really well with Kapanen and Demidov before Slav got moved to that line after the injury. But just to read out what we have on Daily Faceoff for those listening and for those watching, you see it right in front of you. But as the way that things stand right now is Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, Alex Texier, Uri Slafkovsky, Ollie Kapanen, Ivan Demidov, Brendan Gallagher, Phil Deneau, Josh Anderson, Joe Veleno, Jake Evans, Zach Bolduc. So with those three players coming back, Laine, Dach, and potentially Newhook in the near future, these lines are going to look a lot different. And then I find that it changes so much because now you're going to have to ultimately leave some of these guys out of the lineup. And now it becomes difficult because we've always talked about the idea of internal competition and it being a good thing for this Canadiens young roster. But to what extent? Because, Liam, I'm looking at this team right now and I like the way that it is on paper. There's obviously a couple guys that you could leave out, but which ones? Because Joe Veleno might be the easiest option in my opinion. But after that, I really have a hard time taking people out of this lineup.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be, when the Canadiens are a healthy roster, there's going to be a couple guys who are sitting out that probably shouldn't be sitting out. And I think that's going to depend on their play. I mean, the Canadiens just signed Texier. That's probably not a guy you're going to be leaving out of the lineup. I know Gallagher has kind of slowed down, but that's a guy you want in your lineup because he wins battles. He's a leadership guy. He's not going to produce offensively, but he's a guy that you can rely on to get it done, get the job done. So currently, they have Joe Veleno, they have Sammy Blais, not in the roster right now, on the current lineup, but those are two guys that I obviously see sitting out. And then there really only is one spot left. Dach, Newhook, and Laine are all going to come back at some point. Dach looks like he's going to be in the lineup first, so he'll probably be taking Veleno's spot. But I really couldn't tell you who's coming out next.
I can't either, and it almost makes me think: are we at that point? And again, I'm not. We don't jump the gun on most players, and I'm not jumping the gun. I'm just talking about current play right now. Is Zach Bolduc the next guy to come out of this Montreal Canadiens lineup?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think with his recent play, it's got to be Bolduc, but that's also not a guy you want sitting out of the lineup. I think he's going to be a key piece on the Canadiens roster going forward with the style of hockey he brings. He's a physical guy and can also score goals. But again, if you're not producing the way you need to produce, and if you're not playing to the level you need to be playing at, there's obviously got to be a teaching moment. He's a young player, and whether that's, him sitting out a couple games, then so be it. But there's not really a long-term solution. Like, there's not going to be one guy who's able to sit out and be a healthy scratch that's currently in the lineup other than Joe Veleno, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. The one thing I will say about Bolduc, though, is that kind of similarly to Josh Anderson, I think that if you look at the playoffs and you're looking at the style of game that you want the Montreal Canadiens bottom six to play, you're going to want a guy like Bolduc in that bottom six, because I feel like he's that type of guy, kind of that Josh Anderson light, who can actually have some sort of point production that's going to be throwing around the body and up his game when it matters most. And yeah, I'm almost in the camp that if we're talking about Laine getting back into this lineup, let's not forget the way we were talking about Laine in October. Let's not forget the way that we were talking about Laine in the playoff series against Washington. I mean, again, I don't know how serious that injury was when it came to that series against Washington, but it almost seemed like a scapegoat for the Montreal Canadiens organization to say, we don't want Laine in this lineup because he's just not playing up to par. Now he goes out for an extended period of time, and I think Canadiens fans, including myself, and I don't know about you, Liam, are almost starting to forget that how bad Laine was playing when he was in the lineup. And we're kind of just grasping onto the fact that, hey, can he maybe propel some offense, in a middle six role? The truth of the matter is that they've failed to time and time again to find a line combination for Laine at 5-on-5. And there just aren't players in this league that strictly play power play and contribute in that way. And he seems to be the only guy. But is it worth it for those 10 minutes of time on ice a game where he plays 2 minutes or 3 minutes on the power play? To me, at this point, no, with the way that this roster is constructed. And I would almost, it's a hard decision to make, especially when you're paying him as much as you are for his last season before he becomes a UFA. But I think the best thing to do is to keep him in the press box and allow this lineup that's played very, very well as of late to keep flowing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, this is the scenario where one man's injury is another man's opportunity. And Texier has taken on that opportunity. Kapanen has taken on that opportunity and has succeeded. And if we're really looking at the Canadiens' issues, it's not goal scoring. They have the most goals in the Atlantic Division. So their problem really is keeping the puck out of the net, and Laine isn't going to help with that. So is he a bottom six player? No. Is he a great power play player? Sure. Would I like to see him on the Canadiens' first line? I mean, maybe that's an experiment for the future, but you can't change anything right now.
Okay, I think we should move on to the D now and just take a look at what they have to offer. Obviously, there hasn't been that many changes as of late, other than Caden Gooley coming back from injury, which seemed like it was a long time that Caden Gooley was out of this lineup. Now it's kind of been a situation where Jaden Struble is kind of in and out of the lineup. They obviously have that solid base with Dobson, Matheson, Hudson, Gooley, Carrier, which seem to be locks in this lineup. And then a rotation of Jack Struble. But Liam, at first glance, and maybe I'm asking you kind of with a certain tone that would, make it seem like I don't think they should make changes. But do you think that this is a decor that the Canadiens should look to make changes at the deadline and bring someone else in to solidify that sixth spot and remove that ambiguity or that aspect of not knowing which guy Jack Struble will be in at that right D spot going forward?
No, I don't think there's changes that are needed to be made on the defensive side. I think they have a strong base with those 7 defensemen. And I don't think the goals against issue necessarily falls only on the defensemen. So I think they're probably going to ride this out until the end of the season and, see what the future holds for a guy like Jack what the future holds for Struble, and even a guy like Carrier who, has seen some goal scoring success recently, but hasn't been, as great as maybe he should be. But I think they have a strong decor, and, potentially the goals against issue falls more on the forwards than it really does on the defensemen.
And we'll move into that last aspect of the episode for today. Obviously, the power play has kind of been solid for the time being. I think that they've made a few changes where they, if I'm not mistaken, Liam took Hudson off for a second there and then, put Dobson. I wonder what the mindset of Martin St. Louis was there when he made that changes. But as you can see, things are back to the status quo with Suzuki, Slav, Demidov, Caulfield, Hudson, followed by Kapanen, Gallagher, Texier, Dobson, Bolduc. So it'd be interesting that when we were talking about those guys that they might bring in at the deadline or not bring in, but if they were to make some additions, I'm sure it would bolster some sort of PP2 where, like you mentioned, a guy like Boon Jenner is not commanding that PP1, but he would be a significant upgrade to the PP2. So that'll be interesting as well. And then goalie-wise, I mean, we didn't even get to speak about it because we've been gone for so long. But within this time span of October to now, we're in late January, the Canadiens have had a stint with 3 goalies, including Jacob Fowler, who has now been sent down back to the Laval Rocket. He had his games, he had his ups and downs, but there's no denying that there is a future for Jacob Fowler at that starting goalie position. It's a question of when, right? As a young goalie, and they don't want to rush him into that spot. But I will ask you, Liam, Sam Montembeault, Jacob Dobes are going to be the guys going forward. How would you want to see this split, if any split? Because they started off the season, looking at mainly moving forward with Monty. Then they moved to Dobes after Monty's bad play. Then Monty got sent down. They brought up Fowler. Now they sent back down Fowler. Monty's been solid. Dobes has been okay. But where did the Canadiens sit with this situation, and how would you like to see it play out?
I think like any team, you got to go with who's hot. If you don't have a concrete number 1 goalie, you ride the hot hand. And look, Fowler did a great job when Monty was going through that absolute terrible streak, that cold streak. But now he's back, and he's been the hottest goalie on the Canadiens so far. So you got to run with the guy who's playing the best. I'm not a fan of like the 50-50 split. So I think Monty should be commanding at least 60% to 70% of the games. Dobes hasn't been great. Obviously a very passionate and, dedicated goalie to the Canadiens, and he's had his hot moments. But right now they just got to ride with Montembeault.
I think it's really interesting too, Liam, that the Canadiens' success has come with very subpar goaltending. I mean, if you look at the numbers, Dobes is 14-5-3 with an 888 save percentage. Montembeault is 9-6-2 with a 873, and Fowler 4-4-2 with a 902. So this speaks volume, and it obviously sparks a conversation all the time by Habs fans of, imagine if Carey Price had this team in front of him scoring as many goals as they did. And it is fun to think about, honestly. I feel like it would be so fun and electric to have that guy in the net right now. Obviously, to be completely honest with you, I have not lost full faith in Montembeault. Like, I do think that he is a solid goalie. I think that he will get his numbers back up to around a 900 save percentage, maybe even a little bit higher. But I think with the rate that the Canadiens are scoring at, that's more than okay. But I will be honest, and I do agree with you. The 50-50 split is not something that I back. I would prefer a 70-30. I think that's the way to go. And the truth is that I'm not overly, and maybe I'm just a hater, but I'm not overly impressed or love Jakub Dobeš as much as maybe some other people do.
Yeah, I mean, Vegas won with Adin Hill. St. Louis won with Jordan Binnington. You don't need a 1A top of the league goalie to win the cup. So it's all about the hot hand. And I think if Monty can find that next gear and play the way he's been playing these last couple, even like 3-4 years, that he's really helped the Canadiens win some games, then they're going to have success. And yeah, I mean, imagine Carey Price on this roster. This is instantly a Stanley Cup contending team, in my opinion.
So overall, this team obviously has been very, very good. Like we mentioned many times, third in the division right now with 33 games remaining. Liam, the Canadiens will obviously, and with the rest of the league, go on a pretty significant break for the Olympics, which we will look over in the next episode or two and kind of look at what those rosters look like and maybe, an Olympic preview. But this break, I'm going to ask you this. We'll ask it like this. Yes or no? Does this break help the Canadiens or does it hurt the Canadiens based off of their level of play and how they've been playing and the momentum that they have?
I think a rest is good for a lot of guys. I know they have a couple going to the Olympics with Suzuki, with Kapanen, and I think that those are going to be great moments for them. But I think it's also going to be a great rest for guys like Hudson, Demidov, Caulfield, who are literally on the ice every single day. I'm specifically Hudson, who has to get locked out of the building in order for him to not practice. But I think it's a toss-up. Like, I think Suzuki is going to be very successful on that Team Canada squad and learn a lot from that, as well as Kapanen and Slaf, obviously, who's going to be the best player on Team Slovakia. And I think it's going to be important for his development to take on that responsibility. But yeah, like I said, I think it's going to be great rest time for Hudson, Demidov, Caulfield, and even our goalies. So it works both ways, but I think it'll be helpful in both ways.
So just for reference, the Canadiens will play their next game tomorrow night in Montreal against the Minnesota Wild, and their last game before the break will come February 4th against the Winnipeg Jets in Winnipeg, and then they'll resume February 26th against New York. So that's a 22-day break. So that's a 3-week break for the Montreal Canadiens and for the rest of the league, obviously. So that's going to, like you mentioned, definitely going to be much needed for some players. But the Canadiens this upcoming week in particular will play Minnesota at home, will play Buffalo at home on Thursday, the 22nd, and will play in Boston on Saturday night, January 24th. That's 3 games in the next 7 days. How do you feel about those games, Liam? Minnesota strong, but without Matthew Boldy right now. Buffalo playing at a very, very good pace in division game. And then another in division game with a Boston team that's been really, really good. Where do you see this? How do you see these games playing out?
Boston and Buffalo are going to be massive games. Those are games the Habs need to win. Honestly, I couldn't care less if they lose the game against the Wild, even though I'm going to the game. My record is atrocious, by the way. But if there were any games that they need to win out of that 3-game span, it's got to be Boston and Buffalo. They're right on the Canadiens' tails, and creating a gap would be massive for the Habs, obviously leading up to this Olympic break. So you got to win games within your division in order to make the playoffs. And, based on these top 7 teams in your division, every win matters against them. So it's going to be a good little span here, and very important games for the Habs coming up.
And if you had to give your goalie predictions in terms of who goes against which teams here, no back-to-backs, 3 games, 1 game between 1 day between each game. The Thursday. Yeah, 1 day between each game. Sorry. How are you setting up the goalie situation if you were Martin St. Louis?
I think Monty has a good game tomorrow night against the Wild. You go with him the next game, but I think it's going to depend on how he plays tomorrow night, and maybe Dobeš gets one in there. But if Monty's hot, ride Monty for all 3.
I was going to say the same thing. I honestly wouldn't even hesitate. I think you'd go Monty all three, even if the Canadiens happen to lose one of the first 2 games. I just don't think it's worth, because I think the second you take a bit of trust out of one goalie, it kind of throws things off. So I'm definitely in agreement there. But it'll be a fun week. It'll be 2 massive in division games in a very stacked Atlantic division. So we'll stay tuned for that. Ideally, we're back next week this time. And we'll say that on a preliminary basis because obviously things happen. But it was nice to be back, Liam. It was nice to chat some Habs hockey. 49 games in. Time flies when you're having fun. 33 games left, like I've mentioned so many times. But we'll be back. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here or your 111th time here, thank you so much once again. Make sure to check out the content. We'll be back on TikTok, YouTube, if you're watching this video on YouTube, and Instagram and whatnot. And we'll catch you guys next episode.